Good morning, everybody. This is Justin and Lizzie on our third space project, which is Turning Towards Life. It's Sunday morning at the newly zoned time of 9 o'clock here in London. And we are bringing to you today an amazing piece of writing by Norman Fischer that Justin's chosen. And I, for one, am extraordinarily glad to be talking about this particular thing. And I want to welcome you to this space, to the Turning Towards Life space, and welcome us to this space as well. And I want to appreciate the people who have just joined us and let you know that we are now able to listen to our lovely sessions through podcasts, so on iTunes and Spotify. And Justin has done this amazing thing where he's made us accessible in different mediums, so it's much easier to listen on the go and while you're on a treadmill or doing whatever you're doing in your life. So I'm really grateful, Justin, that you've done that and that you're the kind of person who can do that. So it makes it easier for us to access the things that we've done. And it seems to me that somehow that thing has kind of stepped things up a bit, like giving people more opportunities, more ways to listen and to be in this space with us. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And Justin can probably tell you more coherently how to access that stuff than I can. I just go to my Spotify thing and it's in there, and I feel very happy and text people about it. So I think that's all I want to say for now, other than good morning and welcome if you are new, and welcome if you're someone who's been with us for a long time. It's still miraculously extraordinary that we're still doing this. And Justin, you'll be able to say what week we're on, but I think 78 you last told me or something. I'm not very good at the number tracking, but when I hear it, I feel very pleased about the whole thing.
Yes, morning Lizzie, morning everyone. I think this is week 78. I have had a glorious time this week finding out how to do podcasting. And as of today, of course, if you're listening to this some months after the end of March 2019, none of this will make particular chronological sense. But as of today, we are podcasting on Spotify, and if all goes well, in a week or so, we will be on iTunes, and then who knows where else. And I'm in the process of preparing our entire back catalogue, you might say, of conversations to be made available there. So I find incredibly exciting, because lots of people ask us, is there another way I can do this other than being online? I was just pausing because your microphone is very clicky. Lizzie,
I just turned the volume down because you were really loud.
Oh, okay. So that's very exciting for me. It's like making with my hands. So I'm not a carpenter or who knows what, maybe one day I will be, but the putting together of a thing and getting a thing into the world like a podcast is incredibly, incredibly satisfying for me. So it's been exciting to do that, and I'm going to carry on doing that this week, and then we will be complete. And I'm very excited about this source too. So I realized this morning when I woke up an hour earlier, of course, the same time by the clock, but with an hour less sleep because we've gone to daylight time here in London, that I had picked a source this week about time. And it was not a deliberate, but it's a fortuitous choice, I think, that right when we're grappling with what time do we actually have to start with, and some other people are grappling with when do I need to listen to this if I want to be with you live, we're going to talk about time. And so I'm going to have to start making this distinction these days, because some of you may be watching either on YouTube or on Facebook, and some of you might be listening. So for those of you who are listening, you won't be able to see this, but the text that I chose this week is from this amazing book, Training in Compassion, which I'm holding up now, Zen Teachings on the Practice of Lojong, which is by Norman Fischer. And Lojong is the Tibetan Buddhist practice of living with slogans. So slogans are things that can, phrases that can wake us up from our habitual engagement with life, our sleepiness. And there are 51 Lojong slogans. And then the amazing thing about this book is that Norman, who is a Jewish Buddhist teacher, And so he's bringing together all of these different disciplines, is writing about them from a Zen perspective. So bringing together two different Buddhist perspectives, and then writing it for those of us who live primarily in the West in the 21st century. It's wonderful. And one of the things that he recommends doing, and this is, so the other thing about this book is we give this book out to students on our professional coaching course. And during this last week, Lizzie and I recorded what we're calling a bonus edition of Turning Towards Life, where we talk about the course. Anyway, it's a wonderful book that we give out fairly early on to everyone in the course. And one of the ways you can work with slogans is to make, so this, you see I've been doing more making, is to make cards which can remind you, wake you up, that you can put around. So this is, I've been working with this for a while. This is the card for the first slogan of the book, which is what we're about to read part of, which is called Train in the Preliminaries. And this card is all about the basics that are really important to remember in order to be alive in life. So this is my card here, which you'll just be able to see the outline of. But I wanted to read you, because we're going to read one part of this in a minute. I wanted to read you the different parts of this slogan, and we're going to read the part about time. So it's called Train in the Preliminaries, which are things to do before you begin anything else, things to remember. So the first one is, everything that has happened so far, all difficulty is preparation. Whatever has happened so far in life is everything that it takes to be prepared for this moment. The second one is, dedicate yourself to a life of practice, which is what Turning Towards Life is. The third one is the rarity and preciousness of life. I almost chose this section, which is how extraordinarily unlikely it is to be here at all. The fourth one is, and this is where we're going to read from, the title of it is Death is Absolutely Inevitable, which we deny so quickly, but the subtitle of it, which is the part we're going to read, is Time is Incredibly Scarce. The fifth one is What We Do Matters. And the sixth one is Suffering is Inevitable. And so this whole chapter of the book is extraordinary, because I think we forget all of these so quickly. And this passage that I'm going to read now is from the part that is called Death is Absolutely Inevitable.
Justin, can I just acknowledge that you've laminated your little thing?
Oh yes,
Very
of course.
impressed.
It's an all-weather card.
You can take it out in the pouring rain and spill stuff on it, and it still exists as a spiritual teaching.
It will last. That's right, absolutely. I'm so glad that you...
Laminating is a very advanced form of administration, Justin.
It's also an advanced form of craft. So it's
amazing.
really, really satisfying to make things and laminate them. And actually,
can I tell you something about me? When I was 14, all I wanted was a shredder and a laminator for my birthday. So my mum and dad went to Office World and got me a shredder.
That is fantastic. Well,
I love lamination. I always take note.
I'm probably still around 14 in this one, I think. Yes, I've been making these and laminating these so I can carry them around with me. It's both satisfying and practical, Lizzie.
Will you post it? Is both those things, yes. Will you post that in the comments as a picture? Because I think that would be lovely for us all to have.
I will.
It won't be laminated in our own hands, but it'll be something.
No, but those of you with a laminator could print it and laminate it if you're very inclined. So here's the source by Norman Fischer. And just a reminder that you can always find the sources that we're reading on turningtowards.life. Most of us somehow believe that we are the sole exception to the otherwise universal rule that all living creatures die. But it's thanks to death that we can cross over from one moment to the next. If this moment doesn't die, totally disappearing, we can't have the next moment. So loss and death are facts of life every moment. One day, a moment will come like all others, but different in one respect. It will not be succeeded by another moment. Most of us believe we don't have to worry about this moment because death comes in old age, and since we are now not so old, it's not a problem for us. But death doesn't come only in old age, it comes at any age, and nobody knows when. And even if it were to come in old age comes much more quickly than you thought it would. You were young, you blinked your eyes, 30 or 40 years flew by, and now you are no longer young. How did that happen all of a sudden? Lived time is not uniform and fixed. It is not a substance measured evenly by clocks. In fact, time is subjective. As you grow older, time speeds up. To an infant, a day or a week is an eternity. To a child beginning summer vacation 2 or 3 months ahead seem endless. But the older you get, the shorter a month gets. To a middle-aged person, 5 years goes by rather quickly. Time actually speeds up with age and the accumulation of lived experience. This means that if you are 30, your life is much more than a third gone. It is maybe 80% gone. If you're 50, it is 95% gone. There's not nearly as much time left as you thought there was. This is a serious problem, and it's a problem now, not later. We ought to recognize that we are in an urgent situation. We have much less time left than we thought, and we have no idea when our lives will end. So it is important that right now we turn our attention to what really matters, that we don't waste time.
As you grow older, time speeds up. To an infant, a day or a week is an eternity. To a child beginning summer vacation, the 2 or 3 months ahead seem endless. But the older you get, the shorter a month gets. To a middle-aged person, 5 years goes by rather quickly. Time actually speeds up with age and the accumulation of lived experience. This means that if you are 30, your life is much more than a third gone. It's maybe 80% gone. If you are 50, it's 95% gone. There's not nearly as much time left as you thought there was. This is a serious problem, and it's a problem now, not later. We ought to recognize that we are in an urgent situation. We have much less time than we thought, and we have no idea when our lives will end. So it is important that right now we turn our attention to what really matters, that we don't waste time.
One of the things that I love about this, immediately, always when writing it, is I know that I have the habitual patterns of my own personality are the ones that this speaks to most closely, because I think the pattern that I learnt to use to protect myself very early on is, this is too much, go really, really, really quiet, be really, really, really patient and wait. And there is, of course, much to be said for being patient and waiting, but not as an escape. And it seems to me that any orientation we have to time can be an escape as opposed to a turning towards or a waking up. So we could also be frantically trying to do everything that matters super, super, super fast all the way through our lives, so that somehow we also don't have to face this. There's two sides to it, but mine is hunker down, and if I wait long enough, none of this will be true, which of course makes it worse, because when we wake up from our hiding away, it turns out that time has been going by just like it would have done if we'd been alive and awake and engaged. So when I really let Lizzie, when I really let this in, when I'm able to let this in, and as much as I can, which I think is always hard to really get fully, to understand and to feel this thing that Norman says, that there will be a time when there is a moment that isn't followed by another moment. It brings me whoosh, back in. And I'm wondering, as you were reading it, one of the things I was grappling with that I realize I'm not resolved with, and maybe never will be resolved with, is how we really let ourselves see the truth of what Norman is saying, is that time is really short. In another way, it's really long, but it's really short. And I'm really with him. I've been talking about this. It's my 49th birthday soon, and I as I inevitably becoming aware of the passage of time, and this thing that Norman says about time speeds up. Boy, it speeds up. The day is gone before I can even begin to be ready for it, in a way. So I think I'm right in the middle, as I'm speaking this, of feeling both the importance and the gratitude of stepping into this, and also how hard it is to stay alive, at least for me anyway, to stay alive to this, and to not pretend that it's untrue in some way.
Yeah, it's a real, I find it very kind of sobering to, I really did my best as well to let in what you were saying and just see what I could do to not resist it or deny it or whatever in that moment. And I think the way that Norman's written this as well is so normal. And the bit where he talks about, to a child beginning the summer vacation, it's like the endless summer ahead of us. And then I remember when I was little, my mum would say, "Oh no, we're going to do that next week." And I was like, "A whole week? Like, who do you even think that would be an acceptable answer to? A whole week away?" Like, it was so huge. And now for me, a week is just like this little kind of blip. And so I really, then as the passage goes on and it translates into then, as a 30-year-old, it's 80% gone because of how fast it goes. It's like, I can feel the kind of rising panic of, well, what haven't I done? What's not finished? What's to do? All that stuff kind of comes up. And there's also, for me, what happens is there's also a kind of freedom in it as well, or like a letting go of attachment to things having to be done too. It's like a kind of funny thing of two parallel things happening at once. At once it's an urgency, but I think this passage also connects me to the nature of timelessness as well at the same time. Like, one of my biggest kind of epiphanies as a human was that time is a construct, and that essentially we made it up to talk about things, to have some language about things. And so and that was when I was like 22 or something, and I was reading something, and I received that in that moment, this kind of smashing of my rigid notions of my belief about what time was, and that it was a real thing. In some ways, yes, it's a real thing, but we made it. Like, we've made the language for it, and all of our beliefs about it and all that kind of thing come from how they fit into the. And so I feel like this plugs me into that as well, but to not waste it, but also by acknowledging it and letting it in, that time is limited, there's a kind of freedom that comes with it too, which makes me question what's real. Like, I think time is such a staple item in our imaginations and in our daily life. Like, what's the time? Is a really important question. And then when those kind of pillars of things get questioned or talked about or clarified or brought to the front to examine, I get this kind of sense of freedom that, well, there we are, another piece of my narrative, of my story about what it means to be human seems to be rattling around as a non-solid thing anymore. And then I go, oh, okay, well, what questions does that then invite? And so but it's not like I don't feel the urgency in this notion of wasting something, but it's also comes with a kind of liberated feeling that has me not panic about it, but just go, well, and that's what I mean by being sober. It's like I don't now have to rush around like a nutcase trying to like not waste time, but it's good to know about that.
Mm.
And to feel it, and yet to not be pushed into some kind of panic that makes me not be sane or in my right mind about what's to do and what's not to do. So I feel very kind of invited and held simultaneously by the way that Norman's written this, and this kind of way that he has us reflect and uses language that is really accessible and straightforward and short sentences and like really, really concise and powerful. I feel really held by and simultaneously alarmed and soothed.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I was so struck in hearing and feeling what you were saying, Lizzie, that in one way you're talking about something we've talked about many times, which is that in turning towards time in its and trying to be truthful and accurate about it involves a sort of right sizing, and neither let me pretend that time doesn't exist and that I will live forever living that way, but neither clinging onto it like it's like having heard Norman talk a lot and things. Norman might say, and he might have written this somewhere in the book, there is a way in which we're in a desperate situation. There's nothing we can do about this. There's nothing we can do to make there be more time or to time. Like it was completely beyond our control in that respect. And so finding a way of neither being desperate about it, clinging onto it, nor fleeing from it, but being in time, allowing ourselves to be present in time without getting into a fuss. That's a funny way of saying it. It simply is the way that it is that we have no idea what happened to the moment that just happened. Like we started this conversation a few minutes ago, but there's also a way in which I could sit here and wonder, did we? I mean, I can go back and I'll look at the recording and I'll see that we did. But even then, the time that's gone past, we really have no idea about where it went or what happened to it. And the time that's coming, we have no idea about at all. And we live in this little moment or vast moment, but we live in this something in between all the time, which in fact is timeless in a way. The moment that we're in is not in time in exactly the same way. And I think that what we've been developing a conversation about all these many weeks is a deepening and spiraling conversation about how can we find ourselves here in the way things are without trying and seeing what we can do to not carry interpretations of what's happening that are super unhelpful for our engagement and our presence and our care in our lives. And so many of our stories about time are like that. Last night I was we were at the celebration, the bat mitzvah celebration of the daughter of a very good friend of ours. So she's just turned 13. And we've known her since she was very small. And I was marveling at all these, I found myself marveling at all these young adults who were there, who were not so long ago, not young adults. They were completely different kinds of somethings. And then I looked around at myself and all of our friends and the people we know, and we are all so different in so many ways, physically, emotionally, relationally. Like we're different somethings from the time that we first knew one another. And so time is such an extraordinary mystery in that way as well. I don't know where all of that is now, and yet there is a place that is.
Yeah, and as you're talking, Justin, I feel suddenly really connected to how hard times when people have died have been, but also how connecting to the timelessness of life that they have been for me as well. And so the fact that someone can die, the fact that I can die, anyone can die, and that our reality is supposedly not here anymore, or completely different to what it is as someone with a body, there's some invitation to the feeling that, well, if your body now is not here, but I'm still experiencing you as you, even though your body's not here, and you're not here for this moment in time in body, what is everything? And so this whole kind of time and experience don't seem to kind of have a match together in terms of my experience. Like, I don't experience life stopping when anyone has died so far. There is a way that, yes, I fully accept that their body is not here anymore, but my experience of them doesn't stop. And that also is one of these things that turns itself on its head. And it's the same feeling that I get, like you're saying, when like the children are growing up and things are shifting and my body's changing and people look different now and my parents are different than they were 10 years ago, and I look at pictures and I think they're different, I'm different, we're all different. And it just switches on this curiosity about what on earth is going on here. You know, if these things can be true, like we can just not have a body anymore, like what happens then? Like, you know, to be in that question and to see a dead body and to really know that which was alive is not, like, in my body, know that, and still the experience of someone is not different in my being, in my body. So I just feel very connected to that feeling at the moment. And for some, I think it's a really powerful perspective to have, is one that's kind of imbued by this very thing. Like if we could let this live in us, like I'm really appreciating that it's a preliminary. Like it's massive and it's a preliminary. And the 6 preliminaries, like it's all these prerequisites for a something, for a project, for a relationship, for anything. As in, it's very sensible to reflect on these before beginning anything or before anything. It feels like a very robust foundation for truthfulness and for examining one's motivations and beliefs and feeling into some kind of bedrock of what it means to be human, is to consider this and to not run from fear of not wanting this to be true or something, but to turn towards it and then let that be a support to our lives. Like, let it be an informant, let it be a presence, let it be a thing we remember every day. Let it be a laminatable card that we stick on the fridge and like remind ourselves of this when we're squabbling or when we're deciding which place to live or what job to have or what to do with our lives or anything. It just feels really sane and solid to hold this fragility and stability that gets presented by considering time and death.
I think that doing all that you're saying, the attending to this in the way that you're so beautifully describing, Lizzie, is a way that we can both choose to do what matters. Like, do I really need to do this? Do I need to fight you now about this? Does that matter? Really? When we know this? But it also helps us to imbue what we're doing that we might otherwise run from with mattering.
Yeah.
This conversation I'm having with you now that might in one way seem trivial, when I feel into this, suddenly attains deep importance because of this. And so that's why it's such a useful, it's like having a useful map that we can get out and we can look and find out which direction to point ourselves in. Cuts through so much. And I'm aware of the time. I've been looking at the time of our call, but I wanted to bring in, before we finished, I had a great uncle. His name was Arthur, who I really loved. He was a wonderful man, warm, kind, very present person, and he lived into his late 90s. When he was in his late 90s, I remember having a conversation once with him where he said to me, you know, inside, I still feel like I'm the person I was when I was 17. But so much has changed. When I look at myself in the mirror, this body that I inhabit is so different. He would say, and so much has happened. And I feel very aware in this moment. He died some years ago now, so he's not been with us for a while, but he is still here in so many ways. His life is folded up into the time, even just by talking about him. And it seems to me that there's a way that all of his life, which arises and disappears in this very mysterious way, is still yet here too. So there is this way that time folds into it, everything. So why I appreciated what you said earlier about our stories about time, how we've narrated time are often woefully insufficient in a way, unhelpful. And there is this very lovely, maybe we'll come back to it, this very lovely Zen idea that comes from the work of a Zen writer called Dogen, that we are time beings, that to be a human being is to be a time being. And primarily what we do is we are, in one way, travelers in time, always existing also only for the time being. It's a wonderful pun. So much we can do the time being. We are both time beings, and we're always here for the time being. You have to say it with slightly different emphasis each time to get the nuance. It's wonderful. And so anyway, maybe we'll circle back to that one day. But now we are at the time that, there's no way of doing this without punning on it, is there? We promised everyone that these conversations would be a manageable about half an hour, and we're at that time. So I'm going to declare from my part an end and say thank you to you, Lizzie, and thank you to everyone. It's such a joy to be doing this.
Absolutely.
And just to say, join us next time.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Justin.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.